Alright. I feel like a dork. I'm wearing a headlamp with a phone stuck on a headlamp, and it's sort of in my face. Okay, let's see if we can see what we're doing here. So let's throw a pot. Step one, we're gonna cut off some clay with this little wire. If you buy these at a fine cheese shop, register for them for your wedding. They cost you like 20 bucks. If you buy them from the clay store, they cost you $2. We're measuring here because we're making sets. I'm making sets of cereal bowls. And if you start out with the same amount of clay for each one, there's a much better chance that they're all going to turn out the same size. So we'll get the goo off our clay cutter, and then we'll wedge. We're going to do a chrysanthemum wedge pattern. Basically, I'm trying to turn the clay inside out. So if there are any air bubbles, if there are any inconsistencies in the clay, a hard spot, a soft spot, they all get mixed around, shifted to the outside, stretched, and then reincorporated. Ooh, I just wedged something in. What was that? Well, it'll come back around. Come back, whatever you were. The joy of wedging on plaster is it helps you dry out the clay. So you can actually use this to recycle clay, which I do. The problem with wedging on plaster is that sometimes little bits of plaster come off and get in your clay, and when they do, they blow up in the firing and knock a little hole in the piece. That's about right. So we'll just give this a whack so we get it into a convenient shape for throwing. Doo-doo. Very pretty, very consistent. Hello, Stewie. Stewie. Why is she wearing a weird thing on her head? It's very strange, I agree. Okay, so we're gonna sit down here at the wheel. Got a towel on my lap. I'm wearing my fuzzy potting pants, which keep you warm, are keeping my jeans clean, and also because they're fuzzy, the towel tends to stick. It doesn't slide around. Added benefit. Okay, so this is a bat. I like to throw on a bat because if you throw on the wheel head itself, you then have to figure out how to get the finished pot, which is going to be all sticky and easily squashable, off the wheel head and over to your drying shells, and that could be challenging. So if you throw on a wooden bat, just line it up with these little pins. Oop, get on you. Then when I'm done, I can just pick up the whole thing by the sides of the bat without squishing my pot. I do need to moisten the bat, otherwise my clay has a tendency not to want to stick. You don't want it sopping wet, just damp. And then I'm going to take my piece of clay and give it a pat. So I can be sure it's pretty stuck. I'm going to get my hands nice and wet in my bucket of good sludgy water. And press down. So I'm sure the clay is very nicely attached. So you'll notice I have my elbows here right on my legs, and that's so that I can push the clay around with my weight rather than with my arms. Even so, centering is a great core workout, and I can also feel all sorts of interesting little muscles in between my shoulder blades and up and down my arm right here. You have to keep wetting your hands, and the trick to getting the clay to move the way you want is to alternate where your pressure is coming from. So it's not just that I'm pushing from the top and pushing from the side. It's I push from the side, and then I push from the top, and then I push from the side, and then I push from the top. If you try and push from both simultaneously, you will make delightful I'm at the gym sorts of faces, but you will actually not accomplish as much. So one hand is support, and the other is doing the work, and then you trade. So you make it a little tall, and you make it a little short. So this is roughly a birthday cake shape, because the pots I'm making are kind of that same sort of profile height compared to width. You don't want to give yourself extra work by centering the clay so it's really tall when you're going to make something really wide, or centering the clay so it's really wide when you're going to make something really tall, because then you'll just have to put the clay back in the other direction later. So clean off my hands. I'm actually going to measure this. This is, again, part of the trick of doing sets. Yep, 4.5. That's what I want. It's to measure periodically each little step along the way. So now I'm going to go and put a hole in the middle. Again, both hands are touching, they're supporting each other. My elbows, my forearms are on my legs here so that I can't accidentally jiggle. So if somebody startles me, or the phone rings, whatever, where there's a hard lump in the clay that I'm not expecting, and it jostles my hands, I'm sort of braced for it. And if you try and put a hole straight down, your finger tends to go like this. Part of the trick is to actually make more of a inverted cone shape, so I'm actually pushing down more from the side with my finger like a lever rather than straight down. And then we'll see if I've got it deep enough. This is a needle tool. I'll just make a little hole. That's about perfect for a cereal bowl. We want to have some extra fat at the bottom here, so we have enough space to trim a foot on the bottom of this later. Again, both hands are helping each other. And I'm squeezing in. Here's what my fingers look like. I'm just squeezing like this. This is going to be a flat-bottomed bowl. Some people like round-bottom bowls. They feel like they're prettier. Flat-bottom bowls have the advantage of having a slightly wider foot once you're done with them, but still a short foot. So you can have something that is stable on the table. It's not going to tip over, but it doesn't weigh too much. Make sure this is nice and smooth. Now's the best time to really smooth and compress that bottom, because I'm not going to jostle a delicate rim. The rim at this point is not anything you could call delicate. It's rather clunky. Okay, that looks lovely. The outside is nice and slidey. I'm going to squeeze. I'm pushing with the heel of my hand here. Push this back in. Anytime you try and go up with the clay, it has a tendency to also want to go out. So pushing it in first is helpful. And then I've got my fingers on the inside going in like this. I'm using my sponge to support and press from the outside. And I'm squeezing, and you will feel the clay move when you do this, and sometimes that panics people. They don't like the fact that the clay is moving. They think that means something is wrong. But if you think about it, it's going to have to go somewhere, so that's okay. The trick is, once you get to the end of your pull at the top, always start at the bottom and work your way up. But once you get to the top, you just hold still for a second so that clay can get back on center. That way you won't end up with a rim with a wobble. Always take your hands away very gently. So you're just gently relieving pressure, holding your hands still for a minute, and then gently let it go. That way your rim will never get wobbly. It'll always be nice and on center, even if you're using an awful lot of clay, even if I was doing a really big serving bowl. So that's plenty tall. Now I need it to be wider. I'm going to add a little more water to this again. I'm going to just use the side of my finger here and lean. It's not that I'm pressing with my fingertips, is that I'm using the whole side of my finger and I'm leaning that clay out. And again, my outside hand is just supporting. I've got my elbows tucked into my body, so they're supported. And then again, I work my way up the wall, set the rim with a finger on top, let pressure go, and gently let go. Check that proportion. Needs to be a little taller. But fortunately, there's some extra fat down here I can use. I can just pull that up. So I'm going to squeeze. This time, I'm actually going to be pushing in with these fingers, and I'm going to be pushing in with the sponge. So I squeeze some of that clay up. Again, you're going to feel it move, which is scary. You actually made something happen, but that's the point. The other potential problem is you can hear my wheel has sort of a beat to it. Whoa, 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 whoa. And there's a real tendency to try and move your hands in time to the beat, when what you really need to do is keep your pulls steady. But if you're not careful, you'll respond to hearing that that little rhythm in the motor of the wheel, and your hands will start to kind of beat with it, and then you end up with a pot that has a wobble. So make sure you always keep your hands either completely still or moving at a steady pace. Not move and then hold still, and then move and then hold still. Let's get rid of the extra water in the middle. Ew, gross. It's a bogey. Alright, not quite wide enough. Plenty tall enough. Pull that out a smidge. I'm going to start shaping here. I'm just pushing from the inside, supporting from the outside. Using the sponge is helpful. It lets me spread the pressure, since what I'm trying to do is support a curve. It lets me spread that support over a wider area than I could really get with just my fingers, without leaving any little finger furrows. I want it to be nice and smooth. And there's a tendency for a wall to kind of get away from you, and using a sponge can help. It helps for me. So that's perfect. 6. That's too tall. Too tall is better than too short, though. Too tall is easy to fix. So again, support is really important. So I've got my elbows down. I've got both hands touching, supporting each other. I'm going to put a finger inside the rim to support the rim. And then I'm going to move this needle tool slowly through the rim. Hold steady for a minute. Stop the wheel. Pull off that nice ring. Of course, that's now made sort of a messy ring, but I can fix that. Measure again. Still 6. Good. That's better. Get rid of that extra water inside. You always have to work with clean, wet tools, so any little clay goobers, they can make a little part of the tool that doesn't want to slide on the clay, and that friction will make the way the clay moves unpredictable. So you always want to make sure your tools are, you just kind of squeegee them with your fingers before you use each time. Get rid of that extra clay. There's a lot of measuring involved here. So So these will match.